Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of National Fire Radio from our brand new studio. Robert, here we are, bud.
It's good to be back. That's what I have to say.
It is good to be back. We took a long hiatus, and before we got to our guest over here, Dave Lenart from Connecticut. Dave, thanks for joining us. But this is one of our first times back recording again in person since the big COVID.
Yeah, it seems like anywhere you go, that's the way it is now.
We were doing interviews and online segments, Zooms and conference calls, and man, it just doesn't have the same power. When you sit in the same room as the person you're interviewing, or Rob and I just sitting across from each other, not that we took time off from each other during COVID, because we didn't. I saw more of you than I wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Likewise.
But you don't get the same quality interview. And I think, not to take anything away from other platforms that do the Zoom and the video conferencing and talking to guys across the country, COVID has normalized it. But I think if we're going to do it, sound, the video content, and then the emotion needs to be there. You still need to capture that.
Yeah, we did a lot of training via Zoom.
Yeah.
In our membership meetings, our training, we brought in, some Nick Esposito, Pete Morato, Timmy Collette. We brought in a lot of speakers, but it doesn't have the same effect. It
certainly doesn't, right? But it's making do with what we could do at the time.
Right. It's what we had to do. Well, look, I always say, the other day, my wife and I, we were upstairs in the laundry room, and I looked over and saw like 3 Ziploc bags full of masks. And I said, like, what are we doing? Are we having like a ceremony where we burn them? Are we keeping them to give to our grandkids? Like, what are we doing?
You need them for monkeypox, man.
Right, well, yeah.
Here we go. No, but anyway. Well, listen, Dave, thanks for joining us. Rob and I are very excited to be back and doing this in person. And you are our first interview back in our studio space. And who are you talking to? Me. It's right here. I'm getting directions from the boss already, Dave. I apologize, man. First time back in the studio, and it's like I haven't been here before. So
Why do we give Seb authority?
We need to give Seb like a booming microphone from the back.
Yeah.
Where it's like, boom, guys, you're not doing it right. The sound. Sorry, Seb. We apologize. Dave Lenart, thanks for joining us, brother. Absolute honor to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. We have a lot of mutual friends. And that's kind of how your name came into the mix of grabbing you and getting you on the show with us. And so I want to welcome you. A little background on you. You are the fire chief of Derby, Connecticut, which is a volunteer department.
Yes.
Also a career lieutenant with the Bridgeport, Connecticut Fire Department.
Yes.
Currently serving as the shift safety officer.
Yes. Yep.
There's a lot packaged up here. And I know just from doing my homework, we get the brief bio from our guests and so on. We just went over it before the show started. But you have a long-standing history and tradition within the fire service, especially in your area, Derby, Connecticut, Bridgeport, etc. Give me a little bit of background, man. I mean, here you are, as a career firefighter with deep volunteer roots as well. And I know that your family is very important to you in the legacy and lineage coming up to the fire service. So from very early on, I have to think you were very much exposed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was normal for, birthday parties, family events to empty out when the tow went in.
I love that.
And really, it's this isn't our first pandemic. It wouldn't be our first World War. It wouldn't be, my great-grandfather actually started in the volunteer fire department around 1910 in Derby.
Wow.
And he worked his way up to being fire chief 100 years ago. And
so 112 years.
112 years.
So that's a long legacy of a volunteer fire department to begin with.
Yeah, and it's exciting because we're still in the same volunteer firehouse. We're still,
that's cool.
My parents still live in the same neighborhood that when the family came over in the late 1800s from Ireland, that they settled in. So and there's not much of that left nowadays. It's the way of the world. Everyone moves around and it started with my great-grandfather, and then 1939, my grandfather graduated high school, and he was working as a newspaper reporter, and the paper was located next door to the firehouse. So his father said to him, hey, since you're working next door, why don't you start working on the firehouse too?
Sure.
So he joined. He spent a couple of years just being a volunteer fireman, and then the war broke out. And when he was in Newport at the Naval Yard, he had a chance to become a shipboard firefighting instructor. So that led to when the war was over, that led to him having a lot of knowledge about what is the modern fire service, and obviously the Navy usually being a forefront of firefighting technology. He had just been instructing all that. So upon coming home from the war, the mayor said to him, "Hey, we have an open assistant fire chief position. Would you take it?" And at the time, he said the fire department was pretty decimated. I mean, most of the younger men had been fighting the war.
Yeah.
The scrap metal drives, a lot of the apparatus was outdated. The training was terrible. So he was like, yeah. And
I have to believe that was commonplace all over.
I'm sure. I mean, it was. It was just how it was after the war.
Yeah, right.
Well,
And
and I got to say, like,
Yep.
just knowing the history, like knowing Brannigan, and from his experience, like really the American Fire Service post World War II was the U.S. Navy. Like they had developed these tactics, and they truly learned them in combat of how to combat shipboard firefighters, and they started bleeding that over, especially as they went back home into their community fire departments. And it seems like that's exactly what happened with your family.
yeah, and from there, he decided training was going to be a big factor, so he convinced the town fathers to give him some land at the dump, and they created a training school. He went down to the New Haven Fire Training School and started meeting some of their instructors to kind of team up with them and to work with them. And he became a very well-known member of the Connecticut Fire Service. He was on the steering committee that formed the Fire Academy and the Commission of Fire Prevention and Control in Connecticut. Then in the late 40s, early 50s, he decided to dabble in EMS. And him and along with another assistant fire chief, Richard Kiley, they decided to start an ambulance corps. And they did a big fundraiser, which back in 1949 netted them close to about $12,000. So they
a lot of money.
It was,
then. Absolutely,
and there was blackmail involved. There was a lot of like small town politicking.
Of course.
And with that money, they bought an ambulance, and it was so that some of the oddities of the New England Fire Service, the firehouses are all named. So we belong to the Storm Engine Company, so they formed the Storm Ambulance Corps.
Yeah.
And it was the same organization. And then there were some members of the fire department that wanted to start using the funds for the ambulance for other things, and so these gentlemen, along with a couple of their friends, quickly incorporated it as a separate entity. And it caused a little bit of a rift. So as the fire service, rescue, EMS, hazmat evolved, the ambulance would be dispatched on all these calls. And when they would call the fire department, the firefighters were kind of a little bitter that so they said, you know what, we're not going to, we're not doing this. So they went out and they got a surplus Korean Jeep, a Korean War Jeep, and they outfitted it as a rescue truck. And as everything evolved, especially in Derby, the ambulance corps became the provider of EMS and rescue for the city. And so it's a very odd organization in our area.
Well, as you say too, right? Ambulance, right? So all EMS. But then when you say rescue is a loaded term, right? Could
Correct.
mean a lot of
Depends on-
different
right,
things
where-
depending on where you come
Geographically, it's
from.
gonna
Yep.
change.
But you're talking full rescue services outside of firefighting
Correct.
duty.
So extrication, rope, trench, hazmat, confined space is all done by the ambulance corps.
That's
so
pretty
our,
wild.
Our ambulance is staffed during the day. The ambulance carries, a small hearse tool, two hook and can, set of irons, thermal camera, and if there's a job, they go in and search.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
So they
so
okay. Wow. So okay.
It's an odd system, and then over time, like some of the sour grapes went away, so most of the members belong to both organizations.
I was going to say, so there is a crossing the floor
Correct.
now
Yeah,
that
yes.
is prevalent. Currently guys are on both
Yes.
organizations typically.
So my grandfather was fire chief and then chief of the ambulance corps up until the 80s when my father took that over. So my father actually joined the fire department as a ringer for the softball team. And
I love that. That is awesome.
And he met my mother, my grandfather's daughter, and got married. And then, small town America, if you were popular in the volunteer fire department and you were a hard worker, you usually land some kind of city job in the 70s.
Yeah.
So my dad became a cop.
Wow.
And
Okay.
and then he also took over running the ambulance corps from my grandfather. And then our generation came along. I have an older brother, Tommy, and we joined the fire department. We were auxiliary members of the department, which were actually under the old civil defense laws.
I love that.
And at 15 years old, we were required to take a basic 40-hour firefighting course, and we were good to go. I mean, we were, at
15 years old.
it's mind blowing. And I think now, especially being a safety officer, I think nowadays,
Yeah.
we went and fought fires, and it was great. It was 3/4 boots. It was the old 2A air packs. It was just the end of it. We caught the tail end of it.
I'm right
And-
there with
and-
you. I mean, I had joined at 18 years of age, and we didn't have a junior program or a CD program or anything like that. So I had to join and be a regular member. But we jumped right in, and that was right at the tail end of, for me in our department, it was backstep, it was long coats, and it was fun.
Yeah, it was. It was so much fun, and it's funny because then we started thinking as we were getting older, like this is something we're probably going to do as a career.
Yeah.
So my brother got hired first. He's currently a deputy chief in the Greenwich Fire Department.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So
sure.
yeah, that's big money.
Yeah.
They
right
don't.
down on the New York
Oh
border.
yeah, right on the New York border. So and then several years later, I got hired in Bridgeport.
Nice.
But then as that was going on, my brother became fire chief in Derby and ran the department for a couple of years, and he actually handed it off. I became an assistant chief when he left as fire chief. So, what I said, we've been around 112 years-ish and watched our little city. My grandfather was involved in the Valley calls it the B.F. Goodrich fire, which was one of the largest cases of industrial arson in United States history.
Is that right?
Yeah, so it's when you come into the metropolis of Derby on Route 8, if you look down under the bridge to the left, you'll see a massive vacant. It's now a park.
Okay.
But it was actually in downtown Shelton,
Right.
and the story is that the owners wired the whole place with dynamite, and on March 1st, 1975, they
Kaboom.
detonated the entire building, blocks.
No kidding.
And my grandfather was involved in running that. And then my father was ambulance chief during the 1985. We had the River Restaurant explosion, which was if you call before you dig now, when you dig
Right.
underground, that's the reason you call before you dig.
No kidding.
So they were doing construction in downtown. They hit a gas main, didn't know it. It leaked into a restaurant, exploded, and killed 6 people. I think that rescue is one of the most amazing technical rescues I think I've heard in the fire service history. And my reasoning behind that is because it was a small town volunteer fire department that had this 4-story ordinary building full of people explode. But there was no, they were never trained for anything like that back then. There was no USAR. There was no, what got them through that was most of the volunteers worked a trade back then.
Right. 100%.
So the guys were, they were workers. They ran machines. They were carpenters. They were, environmental guys. So their knowledge of the outside industries helped them pull off. The owner of the restaurant was in a freezer in the basement when it blew, and the freezer acted like a turtle shell. And they had to tunnel down while the rubble pile was on fire and get him and cut him out and bring him out. And my father was obviously heavily involved in that as running the ambulance corps at the time.
Yeah.
And I just again, to me, it's just for the time, it was an incredible effort by a group of volunteer firemen that had no business doing something like that.
Well, I will say this, listening to your stories, right, just the family lineage and so on, but watching your expression when you talk about it, you're very proud.
Yeah.
You're very proud of your upbringing, right? And so I think it's incredible because I'm very passionate about my small town community too and being involved. And my family was in, politics within the town. My father was mayor. He's been a fireman for over 50 years. My 2 brothers are firemen. I'm a fireman. My mother was on the ambulance corps in my hometown. Like, these are things that are so prevalent in today's fire service about small town pride, and I still think it's there, right? But my question to you is, watching you beam with this pride of your family and them shaping and being involved in some of the biggest incidents in the town's history and so on. The difference between when you came on and today, right? Volunteerism is not dead; it's hurting.
Yes.
But we speak in negatives all the time. But you're sitting here today, nothing but positives and glowing about how good and viable it is. And I love that about you. Talk to me a little bit about the influences when you started outside of your family. You mentioned in the 80s during that restaurant explosion that they may not have been trained, but everybody was a tradesman at the time. And so they bring special skills to the table. You grew up in the firehouse throughout your lifetime. I remember my influences growing up and these different guys that were there. They were just all badass dudes, man. They were just good guys that worked hard and enjoyed being a fireman, right? What did that do to you growing up?
It taught us a lot. So our firehouse had that group, and I always say, the Derby Fire Department has a tremendous reputation. The Storm Engine Company has one. And it was because the guys understood the importance of passing the knowledge down.
I love that.
So, my grandfather's generation taught a generation of firefighters in the mid to late 70s, and there's a core group of them, and a lot of them still, belong and volunteer. And they were high schoolers when they joined the volunteers in the 70s, and they, Alan, Butch, Pigeon, Mez, my father.
Careful, you're going to forget some names.
I know,
you're going to get in
I'm
trouble.
going to forget somebody. Joe, Len, Finucane. These guys, it was never about them. The minute we joined, it was about us.
Yep.
And I say all the time that, we would pull up to a fire, and these older guys would be in front of us on the line, and they would look back and see us, and they would stop and say, "No, come up here, take the line."
I love that.
And they never pushed us out of the way. They never, but they were always right there if you needed them. And it was everything. When we were young, you go to a pin job, and like you got the tool and you're going to work, and they would stand next to you, and they would never, grab it out of your hand. They would, "Oh, you're doing it wrong." Maybe they would point, or they would, give you a little gesture to help you.
So fast forward then, because today, typically the young officer will take the tool out of your hand and tell you you're doing it wrong, or you won't even have the opportunity to get on the tool because they need to be on it.
Right. I think that's one of the biggest, the volunteer fire service. We've accepted that, I've got to do it because this person's too new or too young. And I think it hurts us.
I agree.
It's the standing back and letting, the experienced guys, and now it makes me feel old, right, that I'm putting myself in that category. But those guys, they knew that the only way this was going to continue and the only way that we were going to be as good as we were is if they taught us everything they knew. And it didn't matter, we had to learn it, and they let us learn it, and they let us make mistakes, and they helped us, and they taught us. And really, they're the big influence on how, again, like not naming names, but I could tell you there's 13 guys that I went to high school with that all belong to the Storms Firehouse that are now career firemen.
Wow.
And without even really thinking. And it's because this group of if you want to call them our senior guys, they made us love being a fireman so much that we were like, no, we're going to go be firemen. And I mean, we have a career guy in every town from Greenwich to East Haven, along the shoreline of Connecticut from the volunteer firehouse. And that's like 15 towns coming up the line.
And I bet you all of them still stay in touch if they're not still active.
Oh, they stay in touch. Majority of them are still active.
That's where, like, how important, and that's the conversation we need to have, is educating our younger officers and chiefs today, and even younger senior guys, if you will, that their impact matters. That their influence, how they conduct themselves in the firehouse and how they go about their business and teaching others and letting others learn for themselves in a way under their tutelage is incredibly important and impactful. The fact that you guys put out so many career firefighters, I'm proud to say the same thing. Out of my hometown volunteer department, I was one of the guys that didn't go get a career job. I had the opportunities. I didn't because I had a viable family business I stayed in. But I watched guy after guy after guy get hired in all these big cities, small cities, but all these career firemen coming out of our volunteer house. And it's a very good feeling for morale and culture to see how many people still credit their upbringing in our volunteer house to put them on a path of a career and success.
I think it's important, too. You hit on this before about like how those senior guys would look back and be like, "No, get up here," and they would stay with you. And we talk about our generation today not doing that, or they feel they have to do this. And I'm thinking to myself, and like we had an incident a couple weeks ago at work where like we did a border alarm, and I was like, "Guys, take this." There was volunteer agency, and I passed the tools off to them to start the extrication because as a lieutenant, I don't need to be cutting apart a car, and they need to be doing it. And there was some hesitation, and it was almost like, really? And I'm like, yeah, like, because if we don't do that, like I always think of a self-sufficient firefighter. Like the best firefighter I can have is the one where I turn around to go tell him to do something and he's already got it done. And he's on to the next thing. He's
100%.
4 steps ahead. And we have to teach that. Like we have
and
to.
it is difficult. I mean, obviously I made the transition from firefighter to company officer to chief officer. And at each level, there's that withdrawal that you have to learn. And, at work right now, we promoted a lot of new lieutenants, even in the volunteer side. Every January, you have your elections for the company officers. And it's like you've got to tell them, like, hey, it's not your job anymore to be on the line. It's your job to be behind the line. And that's probably one of the most difficult transitions. Even going from company officer to chief officer, I found myself a lot of times, as the incident commander in the building wanting to see what's going on, and then being like, I shouldn't be in here.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be outside. So it is a difficult transition, but it's one that you've got to make.
Why don't we? I'm sorry, Rob, but let me just hit on this. Why don't we set ourselves up and our people up for success by putting forth some type of training program that allows for that transition?
Well, I think the problem is, at this point now I'm on my 8th year as a chief officer in a volunteer department, but it's the lack of time with the company officers. So in the metropolis of Derby, our captains and lieutenants are elected every year.
Right.
And the chief's positions are actually tested, which is an oddity in a volunteer department.
Which is not uncommon in Connecticut, though, because there are other departments that do the same.
Yeah, so we have tests. It's administered by the State Fire Academy, and then that's how we establish our assistant chiefs.
Are there interviews, too?
Yeah, it's a written and then an oral.
I've heard about this in other communities, too.
So, but the company officers are elected, and the problem becomes, you elect a guy for a lieutenant, and he's lieutenant for a year. And then he, gets married, has kids, moves away, moves on to something. So it's like they're taking this massive step of going from, a firefighter to a leadership role, and yet you want to train them, but how much training can you give them with their available schedule? With one of the things I do every year is in December I bring in a guest speaker for the officers, and it's somebody that can give them kind of more of a motivational pep talk about their role as, a company officer. And fortunately for me, I've got the Nick Esposito, I've got the Rich Thodes,
Sure.
I've got them on speed dial, so I can bring them in,
Right.
and tell them, hey, can you have a talk with the officers? And it's probably, in my opinion, in the volunteer fire service, the biggest lack of training is officers, and then even from there is chief officers, as to what their job is. And the easiest part of being an officer, as we all know, is going to a fire. Fires are the easiest part of our job. When you're at a fire, it's kind of, you're fully trained for that.
Right.
The problems are, when the mayor calls you at 2 a.m. because this just happened, or when the cops call you because this just happened, and those are the things that you have to make sure that you're equally trained for, because those are the things that are more damaging to the department than a poor
100%.
performance at a fire.
Yep, I agree with you 100%.
I mean, the public has no idea. We could pull up and be the worst fire department in the world, but if we spray water in the windows, everyone's going to cheer, everyone's going to clap, they're going to high-five us. But when something administratively goes wrong, it's in the paper, it's on the news, it's all over the place, and that's where you really got to know what you're doing.
And for a gentleman like you who has 4 generations within that fire department, the last thing you want to do is see that reputation or legacy be tarnished by something that happened that could shed a bad light on everything that's been positive for 112 years.
Yeah.
Gets flushed down a drain with one bad newspaper report.
Correct. And it's just something that a lot of people don't get. And the perception of the volunteer fire department is what carries the weight when I walk into City Hall and say, hey, I need $1 million for new fire apparatus.
Right.
And on the flip side of that, the municipalities yes, we all know volunteerism is declining. You have a lot of members now that actually belong to multiple departments. So, that's another thing that in a way helps and hurts us, where when we get a fire and I call the neighboring town mutual aid, most of their guys are already there. So now I got to call 2 towns away mutual aid. And when you go to City Hall and you try to explain to them the effects of managing volunteer firefighters, they're so different than managing career firefighters. I can't tell you how many, at this point in my life, how many city administrators, mayors, chief of staffs I've had to say, I have nothing holding over these guys. I can't threaten to suspend them. I can't pay them, because they're going to walk away, and the tens of thousands of dollars the city invested in them is gone. So the only way to keep them here is with stuff, and you got to give us the good stuff, the stuff that they want to keep people coming through the doors. And fortunately, we've been in a position where we've gotten that support from our city.
Yeah, that's good, because that's always something that boggled my mind. And when I volunteered in Rhinebeck, the village was very tight with the money, and I was like, you do realize what it costs for one career member? It's more than what you budget for this fire department currently on its
Correct.
operation. And it was a fight to get, and they've done leaps and bounds. But one of the things I was going to ask you before, when you were talking about that firefighter to company officer, that company officer to chief, and they've got to remember to pull back. What are some of the back pocket tricks of kind of giving them that knowledge to do that, because I think it's a huge, like you said, the fire is the easy part, and even our training is flawed, because our training is always about, hey, this is how you do your incident priorities as a company officer. This is what you're looking at. But that human interaction and, like, dealing with the issues, like what if you like advice for a firefighter or a company officer, and then maybe like a follow up as a company officer moving on to the next position. Like what is the thing that you've learned in your career and the struggles you've had that you can kind of bring forward and be like, hey, don't make this mistake?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just clear communication. And we say everything is, I not to say like follow the book, but it's almost that easy. Set your goals, set your expectations, tell your people your goals and expectations, and then manage that. And don't be afraid to tell someone when they're not doing it right, or tell someone when you want them to do something different. But because those are the ways that clear communication, 90% of the problems I've probably had as a company officer were eventually cleared up by sitting down and having a one-on-one with somebody.
Oh, but you got to be willing to do that.
Well,
You got to be willing to have a spine to confront and to talk to people. I think that is one of the biggest struggles that I think we have in society, let alone in the firehouse, where, years and years ago, I asked you that question before between back then and now, right, and the differences and so on. But one of the big differences now, years ago, those guys used to go out in the back parking lot, discuss it, punch it out, come back in and have a beer. Now, we'll have people hold a grudge and they won't come back.
Right.
Or they won't confront somebody but talk shit for months on end, and literally is the cancer that destroys us from within. And so we need to set the tone as chiefs and officers and senior guys, whether it's volunteer or career. We need to confront issues. We need to be able to communicate. I think communication, I wrote communication down on my notes here, and double underlined it, and now I'm going to circle it. Like, communication, I think, is one of the biggest and hardest struggles that we have.
Oh, absolutely. And the ironic part is, in the world we live in today, you have more communication devices.
Yes.
That you can get out. And it's a lot of times it's, one of my companies, very older crowd for the department, the membership. And it transitioned almost immediately to a very young, inexperienced crowd. And that included the officers. The three company officers were very young, very inexperienced. We were having problems with them. I had to bring them in and tell them that, look, I have zero faith in your ability to run a fire. I don't want you taking command. And I could tell you, when I was telling them this, I could see it in their faces. They chopped their legs out from under them. And I said, but we're gonna fix it. We're gonna find a way to do this. And I gave him some names. Give Nick Esposito a call. Give this guy a call. We're gonna meet. We're gonna run some training. And it's been about 1.5 years, 2 years now. And now they've come so far, and we talk about it and we joke about, I'll be like, oh, remember when I told you guys you were no good, and they all laugh now. But I always say that was an amazing moment, because I didn't know what to do. I mean, all I could tell you is I had this company that I really had no faith in them. They were very, very inexperienced. I was really worried about what was going to happen.
Right.
And by telling them that and being honest with them and leveling them, they went out and got better. They sought advice from some of the people that we set them up with. They did some more training. They really started thinking better, and now they're extremely reliable to me.
Well, or you could have buried your head in the sand, not had the conversation with them, and pray that they don't get a fire.
Correct.
When you're not in town, right? And that, I think, is how a lot of it is done today, unfortunately, right? Is that, oh, God, thank God those guys were there today.
Right.
Listen, I've had that conversation.
And those guys, they had a terrible chief. They had a chief officer running their firehouse.
It's not their fault.
And he was, again, he was everything you look for in a terrible leader. He was vindictive. He was manipulative. He cut him down every chance he got. And you saw the effects that it had on that firehouse.
Yeah. I also have to think, though, too, that as hard as that conversation was, I bet you some of those guys, when they left that meeting and drove home that night, there was a sense of relief that came over them and said, I'm glad I didn't have to say it. I know I'm not comfortable in my abilities if I got put in that front seat that day and I didn't have a command staff in front of me, that I got to make those decisions.
Yeah.
That's just an important conversation that a lot of us don't have, is when you have to admit the truth, and the truth is very hard to swallow.
Right. And it is. It's in the overturn of people, in the income of, like any part of the fire service, the lack of experience. It's just, how do you give guys experience?
Well, so how do we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, The modern answers are very, you put them through simulators, you put them through training. It's very difficult to do, but I mean, the best teacher is experience. You've got to get them the fires, you got to get them on calls, and you got to, I believe in a lot of basics, and I don't like gimmicks. I don't like things like that. I want proven basics. And when you go on calls and you let them run the call, or they walk up to you and say, hey, Chief, we can't figure this out. And you look at them and go, okay, figure it out. I'm right here, but figure it out. And you've got to let them start understanding their role better and start figuring things out so that they could do it when it is blowing out the windows.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also, fostering an environment that allows them to make mistakes, but the mistakes can be corrected and learn over time. When you have a management staff and team in place that allows for people to make mistakes, yet knows how to help correct them and right the wrong, that instills those values into your people that lets them believe that they're allowed to work, that they're allowed to be themselves and find their way.
Correct. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, too, that I have a tremendous staff. So above me, I have a fire commissioner who was fire chief years ago. He's a little bit older now. He's a member of one of the USAR teams. He's a structural engineer, very, very well respected in the fire service. So even I have someone that I could, look up to and ask. I've got, besides the family, my brother, my father, I can bounce stuff off them. And then the 3 assistant chiefs under me, Mike, Tommy, and Louie. Mike is my administrative guy, and I always tell Mike his biggest job is to calm me down. I can't tell you how many times I call him.
Oh, that's what I do for Rob.
Right,
that's what I do for Rob.
I got to call him and say, hey, calm me
right
down.
there.
Tommy's my tech guy. Tommy's very good, with all the technology, with all that stuff. And I've always said for years, because coming up, being chief of the ambulance corps, right below me, I've had Louie Allowa. Louie's a lieutenant in the New Haven Fire Department. And we grew up together. He's a little bit older than us, but I tell everybody Louie's my warhorse. He's served under me as a company officer, as a chief officer, and I have him when we have a fire, when we have incidents. He is my, when we're in the middle of it, that's the guy I got to look to. And him and I know my mother's going to, shed a tear when I say this, but, Louie, my brother, there's a few of us that, together, when I feel like, I could do it, we could do anything, because that we've been together that long and we know each other that well, and the stereotypical volunteer fireman, we were in each other's weddings, we were, we were all there, and it's
so much to that.
Yeah, there is a lot to it, because you do trust those guys.
Yeah.
So much.
I'm sitting here. I'm very envious. I mean, like I said, I come from a very good volunteer culture, but we're struggling now more than
absolutely.
ever. We're really feeling the strain on manpower, asking more of our people than we've ever asked, because the ranks are thinning and and so on. But where I'm headed with this is very much like, I sit here and I listen and see the passion that you have about how important it is. And it's not just being a volunteer fireman. I mean, this is your lifestyle. This is who you are. This is what the volunteer firehouse shaped your lifestyle and shaped your approach to probably many things in life, which then sent you on to a career of it.
Right.
So I kind of want to hop in. I mean, as much as Derby sounds amazing, I mean, I'd love to capture the other side of you too, though, is when you put your uniform on and go to work, and that is with the City of Bridgeport in Connecticut, and and so on. So interesting role that you have there, right? So you're a lieutenant,
yes, yeah.
But you're assigned to the safety division, correct?
Yes. So I got hired in 2007 in Bridgeport. For most of my career, I spent at the Wood Ave station, which was Engine 3. At the time, was the busiest engine in the city, and then I transferred over to the heavy rescue for about 3-4 years before I got made lieutenant. And
just before we get deeper, a lot of people don't know a lot of these cities in the Northeast and so on, right, from our listeners. So just give us a rundown of like Bridgeport and the type of makeup it is, so people can form an opinion in their brain as to what you're talking about. So
Bridgeport's your stereotypical old mill, New England city. It's a lot of multifamilies, a lot of 3 woods, triple deckers, whatever we want to call them. The buildings are all an alleyway apart of about 3-4 feet, and it's a rundown mill city. Vacant factories, vacant buildings. Very urban, populations on top of each other. We run 2 battalions, 9 engines, 4 trucks, the rescue, and then the safety officer, a fire boat, and a maintenance division.
Got it.
So the safety officer prior to 2010 was somebody assigned to the training division who would come in whenever there was a working fire or a larger incident if they weren't on duty, if it was off hours. In 2010, we had the double line of duty fatality, and one of the cited problems in the NIAS report was our safety officer was extremely delayed because that day he was coming from home.
Yeah, coming in off duty.
Right. And it was a Saturday, so he was home. He wasn't there. So the city, along with the union, they implemented an on-shift safety officer. So each of the 4 shifts, we do the 24, 72-hour shift. Each of our 4 shifts has one assigned safety officer. So you're assigned to the battalion, but you're independently by yourself. And during the day, you work kind of out of the special services of the training division. So, coming to work in the morning, check my truck like everybody else, my equipment, go out, do some training, find the firehouse to see what they're doing from training, kind of piggyback in, that kind of stuff. And then throughout the day, you go to every work and fire, anything on the highway, anything in the water, obviously Bridgeport, Support City. And the nice thing about the safety officer is you have the carte blanche to go to anything you want.
I was waiting for you to get there. Yeah.
I listen to the radio all day, and if I hear something that sounds interesting, I'm gonna
your way over.
I'll take that in. And it's I love it. It's a tremendous position. You get to do, so much. I enjoy the training aspect of it. I enjoy, you get to work with the command staff. You get to work with the officers and the members.
But this is not just a clipboard bell cap position in the street.
Correct.
I mean, this is,
upon arrival at anything, if there's a fire, I'll do a 360 because a lot of times chiefs setting up the command post are unable for whatever reason. So I'll do my 360, go back and report to him face to face. Then I'll find where I want to go, and usually I'll go to the first line, to the first nozzleman, and kind of just take a look for conditions, see if they're making progress, report back. Hang out there for a few minutes, make sure that they're set, good to go. Then usually try to go to the floor above and make sure that the searches are going on and everybody's operating safe. Nothing, conditions aren't crazy and nothing's going to kind of sneak up on somebody.
Yeah.
So it's ironic because I hate to say the term because, it's like the safety officer position is like a tremendous freelancing position that's there to prevent freelancing.
100%. Yeah, but as funny as that sounds, that's 100% what it is. But that's why that position needs to be given to an individual that can operate on their own and formulate through experience and knowledge the opinions of what need to be done.
Right. And it's tough, and it's extremely hard not to get into it, and especially when, there are some times where you are in the middle of it with the guys and you're making the push and you're right behind them, and it's hard to keep that layer back.
But I would also think too, like you're going in to check on that first line and see where they're making progress, and like the beauty of it is even as a safety officer, you notice that something as simple as the coupling is caught on the corner of the door, you clear that's promoting a safer environment.
Correct. Chasing kinks was one of my biggest jobs.
I think safety officers in a lot of departments is an older member of the department with the clipboard. And I remember somebody telling me I didn't have gloves on when I was walking up to a fire scene. Like, where are we getting this wrong? Because that is not.
I tell everyone I'm not the glove in the hood police. That's your company officer. I'm there to make sure nothing terrible happens on a scale that nobody saw coming. Take notes, kind of observe conditions, but I don't think that the incident safety officer, and unfortunately you got to do it a lot of times, but you shouldn't be the glove police, you shouldn't be the hood police, the eye protection police, and sometimes you got to be, you don't want to be because you feel kind of at that point like you're being petty, but it's just that's the problem is it's usually on our department we have four of us, and we're four very aggressive, very experienced officers that have that ability to know when it is to step in and when it is to stay out.
Do you have an example that you can think of, or a couple examples, if you got more, that where this active, I would say the aggressive safety officer has maybe prevented something, maybe not, but like a good example of you being like, hey.
It's kind of funny. We had a big 3-wood go last spring. And we had a company. There was an acting lieutenant. They were very young, very inexperienced. The fire had advanced heavily on us. We were pulling out, and we pulled back off the 3rd floor for a minute to regroup. And when we went to go back up, I had let a couple members of our rescue company go up. And these were some of the guys I used to be on the company with. One of the guys, Jimmy Doolin, he's our senior guy on our rescue. So, he's like, hey, we're going to take the line. We're going to go up. I'm like, yeah, go. And then this company with the acting officer, they were going to go. I put my arm across the door, and I said, you can't go up there. And they were like, yeah, well, they let them go up there. I said, yeah, you're not them. I said, they're a different company. They have, we're not going to argue about this, but you're not going up there. And then just then our tower ladder crew came around the corner. Again, a very experienced senior officer. And I pulled my arm back and they went up. And the other crew was like, you're not going to let us go up there? I'm like, no. I'm like, what's going on up there? I want to make sure that the experience that's going up there can handle it. They're only a few feet from the top of the stairs. I don't need to choke the stairwell up with 20 people. And I just didn't feel comfortable with that crew going up that stairwell at that time.
And that's a gut feeling that's based on experience.
Correct. And
that's so important
knowing
to
my
remember
members and knowing who was on the line that day and who wasn't. And again, there was no, they had an acting lieutenant, so it's a firefighter acting up. It wasn't anything, and now I would let them go up there. I mean, it's been about a year and a half, and I can tell you that if that fire happened again, that same crew, I would have let them go up there now. So, and that's what you're looking for. And, there's been a couple times, a couple jobs. We had one right along the railroad tracks where I went around front and I said to the battalion chief, hey, the rescue and the truck have been in that building. We haven't had a single window change over from fire to steam. You got another 2 minutes and you got to pull the guys back because there's no water on the fire yet. Yeah. And the rescue's above it searching. And I mean, don't get me wrong, that's where they want to be. And they're, probably downstairs cursing me out as it happens. But like I tell everybody all the time, we all have a job to do. This is the one thing I get to do. So just let me be happy and do it.
Well, I mean, here's the thing too, right? It's the way you guys do it at such a forward position. It's a fantastic position for a guy like yourself with experience and so on. But it's also a very challenging and demanding position too, because one, you got to be positive in your forward thinking and your skill set and experience, but also there's a tremendous burden put on you by everyone on the fire scene, but the incident commander is relying on you, right? That battalion chief or that deputy out in the street is putting a lot of faith in your reporting and your considerations of that fire ground.
Oh, absolutely, and you got to have a good relationship.
Well, absolutely,
and that's so that's one of the reasons why the safety officer is assigned to the battalion office. So in the morning after I check my gear and I'm walking up to my office, that's my first stop. Go in, see the chief, talk to him for a little bit. And again, back to our underlined and circled word of communication.
Right.
You want to have that open communication ahead of time. Before something happens and you're trying to figure it out in the middle of the street somewhere.
Yeah, it's nice, too, to know when you work with the same chiefs and the same safety bosses all the time, a lot of the message is conveyed through emotion and facial expression.
Oh, absolutely.
And not through word, right? They'll feel that stress or see that stress on your face or that sense of ease on your face and so on, just based upon what's going on. And those are those verbal cues or nonverbal cues that are super important.
Correct. It's funny because I could tell you the master of that was Chief Dode. He gave you a look and it shot right through you. You knew.
He gives me that look all the time. I saw him not too long ago and he gave me that look.
You would get that look from him and you would know. Yes or no, if everything was going well. If it wasn't going well, you definitely know that.
Yeah.
But it is, and it's a very unique position. I mean, to be on shift in the firehouse and to be able to respond on what you want and to be able to help out. There are some downsides to the job. You're in charge of rehab. So I feel like a bar back some days where you're just, lugging coolers around.
Well, I'll just be proud of the Kool-Aid you put out.
That's right. It's I joke with the guys a lot. I tell them we have levels. It's got to be if you get an extrication, you can't get cold water. You get the warm water that's in the car. It's got to be a fire before you get cold water. That's and if it's got to be a 2-alarm fire before I let you get the Pedialyte to dip in the there's got to be man. Right. There's got to be rules. You can't just let them keep taking water.
Can't
no.
Can't spoil them.
We had an old timer that said never give the men what they want. That was one of the old timers used to say that all the time. But it's a great position. I was, real lucky. I fell into it because of my EMS background. I was the only EMS instructor in the department for a few years. So I had to do all the EMS training for the department. And that allowed me, it was a natural position for me to go to when I made lieutenant because I would be able to work both jobs, if you will. So I looked out, and again, it was, Chief Dode asked me if it's a spot I'd want to go. I said sure, and ended up there.
Is it a sought-after position?
We haven't really had an opening in a while, but
is it promotional or is it?
No, it's assigned there. It's signed there, yeah. And I do think it's sought after, and especially I can tell you because of the overtime that's there. Whenever one of us is off, everybody wants to work there.
Got it.
And there are, there's the 4 of us together. We have a good little team of us. Billy's kind of like the dad of the group. You know, he kind of keeps us all in line, and he's very straight by the book. Josh is technical, and then Scott and I are like the two kids that they got to constantly reel back in. And, you know, so it's a good crew.
You know, something else I was thinking about that position, too, and you said it before when you were talking about knowing and understanding the experience of your companies, and then also the fact that you bounce around at the beginning of your tour to the different houses to see what training's going on and to maybe jump in. That is that taking initiative position that is so critical for forward-thinking firefighters and officers in our department, because where I'm headed with that is that you take it upon yourself to know intimately each company, the skill levels of the officers and the bosses of each house, right? So that you have an understanding that you know if 5, 1, 6, and 4, ladders 3 and 4 are on the box, you already know what lineup you're getting because you're dialed into your morning tour. You're dialed into your job that much. I mean, this is not a position, or it should not be a position, back to what Rob was saying, that has become, you know, the guy going out to pasture, let's put him in a safety officer
Correct.
spot. I mean, this is a super proactive and aggressive position that takes initiative from the individual itself.
Yeah, and I think the other unique thing about our position is we paid for that position in blood.
Yeah.
I mean,
I like
and it really, you know, when Mitch and Steve died, I mean, that fire was a run-of-the-mill, you know, for our part of the country and our part of the world, that was a nothing fire. And to go up into that third floor and not have a wisp of smoke in there and be as clear as it is right now, and then to eventually, you know, lose the guys in there, it was tremendous. And we, you know, fought hard for that position. It was actually, at the time, our upper administration wasn't very cooperative with the firefighters.
Right.
The union and the mayor wanted the safety officer. The fire chief did not. They wanted to keep everything status quo.
Sounds backwards, huh?
Right. You know, it was a fight. And you know, and I think because of that, the four of us that are in that position, you know, we take that responsibility extremely seriously. Yeah. And I've, you know, in both jobs, I've been criticized a little bit for being too serious sometimes. And I say, yeah, but this is a serious business and serious things happen, and it's all fun and games till it's not. And when you're on the receiving end of it's not, it does change you, and it does, you know, make you rethink of how you're doing things.
Well, those of us who have gone through line of duty deaths, whether we've known somebody personally, it's a friend or a coworker, like, it changes your outlook 150% on how the responsibilities are going to be doled out from that moment forward.
Oh, yeah. It's not going to happen here, Rob.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen here. We're not going to have those problems.
Right.
We're not going to have that happen.
Yeah, I mean, the anniversary was July 24th, 2010. So the anniversary was just a couple weeks ago, and,
Right.
and every year in Bridgeport they do a ceremony, and you know, the training in July usually review the NIAS report, the state police report, and all that. And I don't know what made me do it. I was in work one night. I was kind of bored. It was late, and I took out the roster, and you know, we're about 300, roughly around 300 members, and less than half of us that were on the job when that happened. And there's less than 20 of us now that were actually at the fire, you know, and it's like we talk about what a profound change that fire had on our job, but the you know, more than half of us weren't even on the job when that happened now. And again, it's only been 12 years. So it's amazing how much it changed the job, and some for the better, some for the worse, but it's just, there's that little bit of a divide of the guys that were there before it happened and the guys that were there after it happened. Yeah. So,
but I mean, for you guys, keeping their legacy alive, their sacrifice alive, right?
Right.
And sharing that with the next generation, and for you know, to be a boss as you are, and to be able to filter around to the different companies and talk about safety, talk about training, you know, you have and are empowered to share that message, share that experience, right?
Correct. And it's rough. I mean, it is, you know, it's obviously something you don't like to talk about a lot.
Sure.
It does mess with you, and you know, but it's just you want people to understand it. You know, it's all fun and games till it's not. And that fire was a run of the mill. It wasn't like, you know, a warehouse fire or a big commercial building. It was a 2.5 wood with one window showing when the first engine got there.
Wow.
And it got away from us. It got into the knee walls. It got into the attic, and it, you know, and I just, that's the thing that when we pulled up, so for those of you who don't know,
I didn't know if you wanted to.
So for those of you who don't know the story, and I apologize for jumping ahead and then coming back.
If you're willing to talk about it, please.
It was a couple of the oddities where it was a 2.5 wood. It had a third floor apartment. The first new engine was responding to an elevator call, and it was 2 blocks from the watch desk at the Wood Ave Firehouse. You could see the house.
Yeah.
So they got dispatched on a person stuck in an elevator, engine 3. They got in, they pulled out of the firehouse. Holy crap, there's 2 windows showing fire. So they put a box in. When we got there, at the time that's when I was assigned into heavy rescue. When we got there, the fire was knocked down. We were walking up to the building. I looked at the building. I said, we're going to be out of here in 10 minutes. I mean, we're probably not even going to do anything.
Single line push.
Yeah, it was a basic fire for us. And the first new nozzle firefighter broke their ankle. They had a little bit of a entanglement with their backup firefighter on the stairs, and he snapped his ankle, and he was sitting on the front porch with his ankle, in his hand, and we helped him up. We carried him off the front porch. My partner Tommy and I, we went in, we went above. We were the floor above team, and like I said earlier, it was as clear could be.
Yeah.
In this room right now in there.
Floor above.
The floor above. That's the third floor. It was crystal clear in there, and we noticed some heat in the knee wall in the front of the room, and there was a little bit of smoke coming out around one of the electrical outlets, and it rapidly deteriorated. And Ladder 11 came up there, and Lieutenant Velasquez, he hands down one of the most respected officers on our job. When he walked, when it was getting bad and we were getting lower and heading back towards the stairs, and I bumped into him, I said to myself, "Oh, thank God he's here."
Yeah.
Like
it's one of the guys you want to see.
Right, like you can make the analogy. It was like we're down by 2 in the bottom of the 9th, and Jeter's walking up to the plate. That's how you felt.
Yeah.
And so seeing him, I immediately felt better. His crew, Mitch, firefighter Bake. Mitch was in my academy class. He sat right in front of me. He was the oldest member of our class, so which made him the de facto. We all called him Grandpa, but he was our class conscience, if you will. And by that point, we were coming down to change bottles, and it was minutes. We came down the stairs. We looked at a couple of conditions. We went down to go change bottles, and that's when they called the Mayday, and we missed it by minutes. When you take the timestamp, it went from crystal clear, no problem, to a double Mayday.
So just to inquire a little bit, because I don't know all the details.
Yep.
I am a little familiar with it, and Chief Thode gave us a nice conversation about it and storytelling when we were up in Bridgeport and got a nice tour of the city and so on. But fire conditions obviously rapidly
deteriorated, yeah.
Especially with knee wall fires, things like that. Is that what happened? They just got overtaken?
To be honest, I don't know. I mean, we came down to change bottles, and I can tell you that we came down. We were coming out of the front of the building. The officer in the original fire room said, "Hey, I think it's burning pretty good going up the walls."
Yeah.
And we ducked into that room we had tools to open up. And we opened a couple things up. We tried to make radio contact with Ladder 11. They didn't answer. We said, you know what? We got to go change our bottles because we got to get back up there. And when we came down the stairs, that's when Lieutenant Mohammed, Sam Mohammed, he's a firefighter back then, he called the Mayday for Lieutenant. He had found Lieutenant Velasquez unconscious. So it was a matter of minutes from when we left them to the Maydays happened.
Wow.
And it's a blur sometimes. I could tell you that, it was chaotic. It was Lieutenant Velasquez was removed first. We for a few minutes, maybe whatever it seemed like, we didn't know that Mitch was down up there. We just knew that Lieutenant Velasquez was down. So it was one of those we pulled out Lieutenant Velasquez. We started working on him. They did a PAR, and the problem being that the Ladder 11 officer was the guy down, so nobody answered for Ladder 11. And it wasn't until the rest of the Ladder 11 crew realized that their officer was down. They didn't know where the firefighter was, where Mitch was. So, fog of war, very chaotic. I could say you could never set up a training scenario. You could never set anything up to simulate that. Right. Because the emotion, and again, it was this time of year, it was 102 that day. It was as hot as could be and humid as could be. So that played a factor into it. And fatigue. We were changing bottles to go back in and all that stuff. So it's every bit of the nightmare that you think it is,
and more.
Yeah, and you can't prepare. You can't mentally prepare for when it actually happens. As much as we train and as much as we're ready, and especially when you add the fact that we all. I mean, most jobs everybody.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like it's
Bridgeport's small
right.
enough.
You know, it's not like
Yeah.
it's a nameless guy or like, hey, I don't know that guy, or my cousin's cousin might know him, but you know, it's guys that you were joking around with 15 minutes earlier,
Yeah.
and you know, that's it. And the you know, I'll tell you that the department, the way that the department treated us was probably one of the most, I'd say, criminal things that they made the entire crew that was at the fire go back to headquarters, and they sequestered us till the wee hours of the morning. We were locked in a room at fire headquarters till well after midnight, and they kept telling us we had to wait for the fire investigators. We couldn't go home, and like the covering fire companies were sending food up and
Oh my God.
and bringing, you know, and it
Was this because they didn't know how to react?
I think that they were so you know, at the time the department management was so unprepared for something like this and that they didn't know what to do. And then finally, you know, well after midnight, the group of fire marshals walked in and they were horrified, you know, that we were there.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, just go home, we'll talk to you later. But it wasn't as traumatic as the event was. The follow-up was even worse. You know, the way that the department handled it, you know, I hope, God forbid, if something like that happened, we would do it better next time.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. You know, these are those times where management, I mean, you know, a lot of times we complain about management, but man, when we need to be taken care of and we need to take care of our own and the management fails us.
yeah.
You know, it's one thing if it's a policy or something that is, you know, something on the
Get a
everyday operation.
vacation
side.
day
Right,
canceled
yeah,
or
it's
something
not.
like that. It's not
and
a
it was
big
like
deal, but-
we got out of there after 1 a.m. and there was question: are we coming back at 7 a.m. for our shift?
Ugh, my God.
You know, and it was like, you know, the deputy chiefs that were there, nobody knew. They were like, oh, we got to find out for you. And a lot of the guys were like, I'm not going to be here at 7 a.m. Like, figure it out, you know.
Well, I mean, you got to decompress, and then you know, then you have to deal with what you personally have to
Right.
deal with, which is just a whole nother, you know, conversation for sure. But I mean, thank you for sharing that with us, because I know we kind of alluded to it a few times, and I know that fire was very impactful for the city of Bridgeport and your fire department. And I think a lot of corrections were made from it too. No?
Yeah. So yeah, we, you know, and again, like I said, that safety officer position, you know, we paid for those positions,
Right.
and that's the biggest lesson that I hope we never lose sight of, is that all the gains we made, we paid for it.
I think that was one of the things that I was most impressed when Chief Dode took us around, was getting down to the firehouse to see the memorial and to see
Yeah.
how dedicated the members were to making sure that we didn't forget those two gentlemen from that day. And it was just getting the chance to talk to them and see the work that they put in there. Just,
Right.
you know, it was just crazy.
So
now we brought the mood down to the floor.
listen,
No,
you know, I
listen,
mean,
it's-
we never know. We never know when we sit down with our guests really how it's going to go.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
It's
Yep.
unscripted.
Yep.
But what I take away from this is, one, your willingness to share, because it can't be an easy story for you to relive. And you know, we've done some interviews now and some podcasts with guests that have really were willing to open themselves up. So I truly appreciate you having that conversation with us and educating us and the listeners about it, because frankly, people need to go and read and learn about it too. NIOSH reports, right? And so on. You need to educate yourselves about line of duty deaths. You need to educate yourself about how departments responded and how they took care of their own. And obviously, you know, it sounds like you guys hopefully learned several lessons from there that paying it forward will
Yeah.
take care of your guys if, God forbid, it ever happens again. But I think it should be said that it can happen again.
Absolutely, and I you know, and it can happen anywhere. I mean, that's the biggest thing is it doesn't matter. You know, it doesn't.
Yeah. So let's kind of change course a little bit. Like you said, we'll change it up a little bit. You have a lot of other things you enjoy too. I know you teach. You have a class that you're going to be teaching, and I know you're very excited about the volunteer command post.
Yes.
You were talking about your volunteer service and how passionate you are about it. Talk to me about what you've done.
So you know, right off the bat, one of the things I noticed when being involved in Bridgeport and involved in as an officer there, when there's a fire, we run it with a command staff. There's the chief, an aide, deputies come, a lot of, and then you go to a fire in Derby, and it's like the chief by himself, like with a radio. Maybe he's got a clipboard, and I said, you know, there's got to be a better way to do this. So we started thinking, how can we make this better, and especially in a volunteer department. And I came up with you know, my class line I always use now is like, what do I do with my father? And what I mean by that is, my father joined the volunteer fire department, like I said, in 1975. He was a fireman. He was a police officer. He was an EMS officer. He worked for the state, for emergency services, for Connecticut for years. He's got this tremendous wealth of knowledge of incident command, of all these different facets. But because my dad's now 65 and older, he can't physically go into a fire. He can't, but they all still come, right? Volunteer firefighters, how many times you go to a fire, you turn around, and there's 10 old guys that are all there. And I said, you know what? Those are the guys we need here. So we created a chief's aide position. And what we do now is we take the older guys and we put them through this class, and we teach them how to run a command post and how to, handle things so that the fire chief, the incident commander, could concentrate on the fire. And they could handle, it's a volunteer fire department. So that, the dispatchers are calling and asking, hey, what firehouse do you want to cover you? Do you guys need Red Cross? What do you don't want to be dealing with all that when you got guys at an IDLH, and let somebody else handle it. So we've created this command staff idea, and again, our biggest asset are, I hate to say our old guys, sound bad, make them feel old, but it's the experienced guys. Give them something to do. So I started thinking about it, and I put a training program together. And every year in Connecticut, we have an EMS conference, which sounds funny, but they've transitioned over from there's the EMS conference and a fire conference now. And the fire conference started a couple years ago. They're started adding more and more fire classes, and it's the last weekend in October every year at the Foxwoods Casino. So I wrote up my program, and I submitted it, and I was one of the presenters selected. So I'll be giving my first class on volunteer command posts and running an incident, because I do feel that out of all my years in the fire service, probably the least trained group is that volunteer fire chief, because you're facilitating the training for the members. You're facilitating the training for your officers. When do the 4 or 5 or however many chiefs you have in your department sit down and do training?
100%.
And even for myself, I want to come to your class because as a career officer in a small department, my first major incident that I ran was a commercial junkyard fire, and the chief and the command staff were out of town. So per New York state law, I was the acting fire chief.
Winner.
And if it wasn't for Dan Nichols and his father being there, because I remember I was going back to the cab of the fire engine because I was going to say, take me home. No, but because it was the only environment that I would be able to have a quiet environment to talk on the radio without everybody coming up to me and grabbing me. And he showed up with his chief's buggy, and he was like, hey, come to the back here. This is committed. And he started getting my radio set up, and he's like, what do you need?
Right.
I'm here to help you out.
And it is. A lot of times it's that, I said there's been a couple times where I've had to, grab one of my guys or grab one of a neighboring town and be like, okay, you need to set up command. Like, let's do this, and we'll do it together. And we'll, having a bodyguard, having somebody there to stop every, the old saying, Tom, Dick, and Harry from coming up to talk to you because, hey, there's a fire and you're the fire chief, and they want to say they talk to you. And again, that's another thing I've running an incident, I'll say, hey, do me a favor. Don't let it, take this radio, talk to dispatch. Let me talk to the guys in the fire. But if anyone starts coming up to me, stop them and make sure that they need me before you. And, again, you got to find somebody big. You got to find someone burly that could, step in front and say, hold on, what do you need? Because it is, as the incident commander, your focus should be on what's going on in that building. And the distractions are so many, and the people want to talk to you. And dispatch wants to call you, 30 times and ask you questions. You've got to be grounded because, that's where you'll miss an urgent or a mayday or something. And you don't want to be the guy that missed it because, hey, the Red Cross called. They wanted to know where would you like them to meet you.
You want them to boost the water pressure?
Yeah, you don't, I don't care. For us, mutual aid is tricky. The valley, the area that Derby's in, we're small cities that run in conjunction with each other. So even though my initial run card might be this, and my second alarm card might be that, my second alarm card might have been my first due company. So now the dispatcher's calling you saying, like, okay, well, do you want Engine 5 from Ansonia to come cover or Engine 3? I don't care. I don't want to, I don't want to talk to you. But
we years ago instituted here that any mutual aid chief responding in on a job comes to work. And those mutual aid chiefs report to the command post, SCBA on, ready to go to work. And we'll divvy out positions, whether it's a divisional position inside, safety officer role, or we say, break down your stuff, but I need you here at the command post, and you're gonna run the response channel.
Yeah,
and I'm monitoring the operations channel, or vice versa. And then so what we've come to realize too, and what we even need to realize more in the volunteer fire service now is chiefs need to come to work. Like, we can't forget that fire chiefs are firefighters. So I don't give a shit what color your helmet is. If I need you on a line and we have enough of the white hats floating around, like, I might put you to work, not in a command role. Sorry, buddy, but like, get back to being a fireman. Right. Like, I need you on the line. But it is absolutely important to take care of your resources and have people there, because the amount of jobs and the more you can automate and simplify the process, meaning structured alarm assignments, structured run cards, right? I know you said your area is a little bit challenging, how you get your automatic aid and so on. But like, those are things like standardized communication, standardized terminology, standardized, X, Y, and Z, right? So what we did here many years ago in our area is we've standardized almost everything across the board, so that if my chief of department or our assistant chief who runs the operations division, if our assistant chief shows up and a mutual aid chief of department shows up, we don't care anymore about where you come from. We expect you to have the same training and experience that our guys have. And so we might take your chief of department and put him in command of this fire. Our assistant chief is the operations boss. We don't care anymore about what town or where you're from. We can't play those games anymore. I remember years ago, you'd roll up as a chief to a town 3 towns over for a mutual aid job, and they have a lieutenant running the fire, and he won't give you command. I'm like, this is the most asinine thing I've ever seen in my life, Plus, me, I'd rather be a fireman anyway than sitting at the back of a buggy or command vehicle and, barking on the radio. And
Jeremy and his blue cards over here.
Yeah, I don't even know. I'll be honest with you, Rob. I didn't even know what blue cards were until like 2 years ago when it came up in a conversation with all of our friend group. And I had to look it up. I had no idea what the fuck the blue card was. I
understand why Mo hates it so much.
It is so stupid. Oh, my God. That's a whole other story.
So anyway, this class is going to be it sounds like it's going to be a home run.
I'm hoping. I mean, to be honest, I'm a little nervous. I've never done anything like this, so.
You're not having a hard time speaking.
No, I mean, I was gonna say, I know, no one has ever accused me of not talking. And
brother, you got passion. Yeah. You got excitement in your voice, and that's contagious. And we need that. We need guys to stand in front of the room. We need guys to be passionate about the volunteer fire service. When everybody says everything's so bad right now, we need guys like you that are saying, "No, it's still good. It's still good."
And it's because of the group. I mean, my neighboring chiefs I'm very good friends with all of them. We talk a lot. My chiefs, my company officers. Again, back to the big circle word, communication.
Yeah.
And it really is. It takes us sometimes a few minutes to get traction, but we're a good group. And I think in our little area of the world, we call it the Valley. So they said it's Derby, Ansonia, Seymour, Shelton, those towns all together. We're a typical family, we'll fight with each other, but don't fight with us,
I totally get it. I totally get it. We're very much the same way here too. And we have very proud roots in our volunteer service, and we have excellent working relationships with our mutual aid partners.
Yep.
And Rob has seen it firsthand. I mean, it's our second due truck comes from the same town. There's a second due truck. They know any confirmed fire, they're coming. They're there before they're even dispatched because they know they're coming.
Yeah, yep.
Right? That, to me, as a boss or as somebody in charge of a fire scene, takes one stress level off me.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important. Consistency, right?
Yeah.
And so on is very important. So, well, good luck with your course.
Thank you.
Where are you going to be doing it?
It's at the Foxwood Casino in, I think it's Ledyard, Connecticut. Foxwood,
and that's what, in October, right?
October 29th.
And that's
the Volunteer Command
Pro
Post. That's
Expo.
Fire Pro Expo.
That's cool. And for more information, I'm sure you'll find it online and so on. So what's next, man? What's next for Dave?
I don't know. I mean, so in Derby, you're only allowed to be a chief for 8 years. So my term expires January 5th. So
that's my birthday.
Is it all right? So I'll send you a text.
Yeah.
So at that point, my chiefdom will be done.
Yeah.
So
time back.
Yeah. I guess I can put the phone down. The commitment. Small town volunteer fire chief. Your phone rings off the hook, and it's everybody. It's every issue. Yesterday was election day. It was too hot in the gym auditorium that they were doing the primary elections in, and they wanted to know if the fire department could bring over some of the big fans that blow the smoke around to put in the
small town, baby.
Small towns, and that's the crap you deal with.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm Fortunately, obviously, I'll still be in Bridgeport, and I'll still be there. But to be honest, I don't know.
Well, that's good. I mean, listen, sometimes you need a little bit of time to figure things out.
Take a year or two off.
But I know you'll probably enjoy getting in that back seat again.
Yes, I'm looking so forward to being able to sit in the back of the room and
Riding
complain.
backwards, yeah.
And
That's great, though. That's so much fun. I wanted to ask you this too, right? You talked about your family and your upbringing and the lineage and so on. And you named a lot of gentlemen before that you remember growing up with and were valuable. But to be a leader, to be a senior man, to be somebody that you want to emulate, right? Somebody in the firehouse that you just look at and go, man, I hope my career is half as good as this guy, or I hope my demeanor, I carry myself, in some regard the same way that gentleman did or that woman did. We have a lot of younger viewers that always ask us about that, and so on. And so what were some things that you, as growing up in the firehouse, outside of your family members, because I know, you lived it, but like some of those people in your firehouse that had some of those traits and qualities that probably fueled your passion even more so, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and the funny thing is a lot of it was, just their confident, calm demeanor. There are plenty of guys out there. They're senior, gentleman and lady that they're, again, like we said before, it may just be a look, it may be just a nod, but it's that confidence behind it, that faith that you have in them, that they know what they're doing, and to me that says a lot. It's one of those the less you say, the more you say type situations,
But most people don't believe in that anymore.
And it's an old school, new school thing. I mean. One of my favorite stories about my grandfather was right when he became assistant fire chief. Back then the firehouses were largely segregated either by religion, so my firehouse, we were always Irish Catholic. The Pagasic firehouse, they were Polish firehouse. So that's the firehouse you mentioned earlier. They're right next to the Polish church. That neighborhood is so they have the ladder truck. So my grandfather becomes assistant fire chief. They get a phone call. A lady, her clothes blew off the clothesline onto some power lines. Could the fire department come help? So my grandfather said, he called over to the Pagasic firehouse and said, hey, can you take the truck over and just go help the lady out? So they went. And in the interim, a box came in. And everyone got to the firehouse. The truck was gone. This is obviously pre-radio or pager days, so nobody knew where the truck was. So the chief from that firehouse calls up my grandfather and says, hey, look, if you ever tell my ladder where to go again, I'll knock your teeth out. So my grandfather said to him, well, why don't you come down here and tell me that?
Right.
So the guy jumped in his car, and at the time, the firehouse was located right next to the city green. So he said he picked up the still phone to the police and said, hey, the other chief and I are going to go have a discussion on the green if you get any calls. So they said about 10 minutes later, my grandfather came walking back into the firehouse. He was beat up, shirt ripped up. They says, my God, Eddie, beat the crap out of you. He said he shook his head and said, you better go pick him up. He's unconscious on the green.
Oh,
and he said, after that, I never had a problem. He said,
wow.
So, he said, after that, I never had a problem. Nobody ever questioned what I was doing or.
Baddest son of a bitch in the fire department,
and it's
right?
like you said earlier, years ago, guys had a problem. They went out back in the firehouse and took care of it.
There is something to that. There is something to that, man. Oh my God, I love that story. That's amazing.
And I can tell you, there's a lot of them like that.
Yeah.
But he was the little fiery Irish guy, and he just.
But that to me, I mean, not even being involved in that, but you're part of that family. You're part of that storytelling. I mean, I would love to hear you tell that story today to the new kids that come in the firehouse. It's one of those nights you're sitting around front bumper talk after a run or something, and you're like, you want to hear a great story?
Yeah.
I mean, that one sets the tone, but it also paints and educates in such a broad stroke about how important we're proud of ourselves, we're proud of our institution, we're proud of our values, and we're going to stand up for that.
Yeah. And our, I tell a lot of people, I say, look, our little town is run down. I mean, it's going through a rough patch. We were talking earlier, they're trying to redevelop it. There's a lot of negativity involving our little city. And I always say that the volunteer fire department's one of the few bright parts.
Center of the community.
It is.
Hands down. Main Street, USA.
It does. And the members do a tremendous job. They're out there, The track team needs money to go to a national meet. They're there. The cheerleaders need money. The firemen are there. Somebody's sick. The firemen are there. It's the one branch of government that is coming all the time, and it's coming to help you.
Yeah.
And I joke all the time. My dad was a cop. He told us, "Don't be a cop." He says, "You never been to a party and had someone go, 'Oh, great, the cops are here,' So right. So
my line, I always say, nobody looks in the rearview mirror and goes, "Oh no, a fire engine's behind me."
So it's one of the few bright shining parts of our communities are our volunteer firehouses, and I think a lot of people still don't even know. I can't tell you how many times we go on a call and somebody's like, "Oh my God, you guys are volunteer."
Oh, I know.
And it's like that. It's one of those things that yes, it's hurting. Yes, its numbers are dwindling, but its importance nowadays is ever more there, and the communities don't, I think, realize what they have until they lose it.
Yeah.
I'm with you. And if your department has half the passion that you have, right, you guys are in a good spot. I mean, I know with our department, we're losing members left and right just because it's not sustainable, and kids are moving out, going to college, not coming back home. It's it's a suburban community to a major city, so we're having our struggles. But the guys that are there have been the guys, and you got guys, myself, 27 years, and we're the guys that are still holding the place together. And the other guys come and go, but we're still there, and the staple's still there. So I agree with you, man. I think we're on a difficult trend in the volunteer fire service, but there's still a lot of good.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
for sure. So listen, I know you have a side project as well, because we're going to start the wrap. So let's talk about your other love. I want to talk about this real quick because I know it's important to you, and I know there's a lot of guys out there that are like you. And you follow through on another passion of yours outside of firefighting.
I do, yeah. So like you guys, I have a small podcast.
Love it.
It's a lot smaller than this. I mean, I walked in today. I was kind of floored with all the equipment you have. But
it's only for looks, Dave. We're not very talented, and we don't even know how to use half this equipment.
Yeah, it's very fancy.
Fire's going into nowhere.
I co-host a podcast about the Disney bubble, Disney, Star Wars, Marvel.
That's awesome.
Called Two Dudes Talking Disney. My friend Tony and I, we started it 6 years ago.
Good for you.
And it's something. We try to put out a content like once a week or a couple weeks,
great.
just to updates on Disney, on Star Wars, on Marvel, what's going on, what's new in the parks, what's new with the companies, and it's just something that for fun.
It's great to have a passion outside of the firehouse.
Yeah, it keeps us sane. It does.
It certainly does, but it's fun though too. And 6 years ago, I mean, that's ahead of the curve.
Yeah. It's as I've said before, we jokingly say we're the largest Disney podcast in the lower Naugatuck Valley in Connecticut, which we're the only ones, but
that's all right.
We're still the largest, and I think our 3 loyal listeners. My favorite thing is I'm sure you guys, when you started out, like, you used to pull and see where you were being downloaded,
right?
And like, we were real big in Saudi Arabia. There was like 7 dedicated followers, and I said, then I started getting worried, like, is somebody hiding a message in our podcast? And
that, or maybe it's just your family members serving overseas.
Something,
Well, that's cool, man. Well, congratulations. What is it called? What is it called? And where can they find it?
Two Dudes Talking Disney. We're on iTunes, and then social media.
Two Dudes Talking Disney.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Dave. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
That's very cool. Anything for us, man? Anything? We're gonna wrap the conversation.
No, I'm thank you. I mean, this was a lot. Again, Chief Thode and Nick Esposito, they said to me, "You'll have a good time." And
so Chief Thode. Just on a side note, Chief Thode and Nick Esposito both out of Bridgeport, Connecticut. Nick is captain.
Yes, captain of the rescue company right now.
Rescue company, and Chief Thode is retired out of Bridgeport and is now as a career chief elsewhere in Connecticut, but they've become friends. They've become friends of ours, and they were both on the show, and it was quite a while ago. I'd love to get them back. I'm trying to do some new stuff with Nick, and Chief Thode is always a phone call or a text from me. I love that guy.
Yeah, they're good guys. They've helped my career. They've helped me, numerous times. Nick, I love, because I think sometimes I yin to his yang. He's so serious, and
he is.
He is, yeah. And I every time he posts it online, I started calling him the Fire Yoda, and we actually took a picture of him and his gear, and we superimposed Yoda over it. And then every time he posts something or does something, I throw that right on as a comment.
That's awesome.
And like, I know even his kids like, Dad, what's up with that guy that always puts the Fire Yoda thing on? So if he does a podcast somewhere, I'll usually troll him. And
well, now I know, right? Now I know, because I've seen that before. So now I know where it's coming from.
And what I love about Nick is he's one of the most humble, people you'll ever meet.
For sure.
And for like the thought of him like sitting down with an Instagram page, to me is just like mind blowing, because I just I don't see him like that. I see him in his very calm,
Sure.
Demeanor all the time, and it's just, yeah.
You know what's amazing to me, though, is that somebody like him is willing to put the time in and see the value in being able to share a message on a channel and a location where people are paying attention.
Oh, absolutely. And
He could spend time writing articles, and I'm sure he has, but you could do articles, and you could do this, and you could do that, but you're not hitting the people every single day with that type of content.
Right.
What putting out short clips, short notice, short photo, still photos, give your insight on something. The fact that he sees value in that, I love, because he's not your typical, Instagram guy.
Yeah,
or
no,
social
not at
media
all.
guy. And so that to me, though, is why I think we're trending in the right direction with using social media to our benefit.
yes.
And educating our own through the channels of communication of today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it, brother.
All right.
Well, thank you so
No,
much,
thank you,
Chief,
guys.
for joining us.
Yeah.
And it was an absolute pleasure to meet you. If anybody wants to get a hold of you, find you, would you mind sharing your...
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at volley_chief. You can find me there.
How'd you do that? That's a pretty good handle. Were you early to the platform?
I literally started it about 2 months ago, and I decided to do the class.
Wow.
I said I should probably.
Do you know what I am gonna? We're gonna take credit for the underscore, though, Rob.
Yeah, 100%.
We're gonna I think our initial start with the underscore between our words, it carried on. There's a lot
Yes.
of channels out there that use the underscore. So we're gonna boldly claim that as ours, and thank you for ripping that off.
No
from
problem.
Us, but
Yeah,
we're glad to share
it's
with
part
you.
of the fire service, right? Just take somebody else's.
Yeah, right, yeah,
Hey, I had this
repackage
great
it.
idea. You know.
Right, yeah. Reinventing the
Yeah.
wheel. It's my idea. So, well, Dave, thank you, brother.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
luck with your new course.
Yep.
And with your career, and this won't be the last time that we get together for sure.
Good.
So I appreciate you for joining us.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for coming
Rob,
on.
thanks for sitting down again, pal.
No, this is great.
It's good to be back.
It is.
Good. You got a lot there. So thanks for. You got anything else?
No, just
No,
thanks for
that's it. Just
thanks
thanks
for being here. With
Yeah,
us.
good. All right. For Rob Ridley, Jeremy Dodge, and our guest today, Dave Lenart from Derby, Connecticut, and Bridgeport, Connecticut. Dave, thank you again, brother. Appreciate you. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to follow, like, share, and tell everybody about us. And two dudes
Talking Disney.
talking Disney. Talk soon. We'll talk to you guys soon.